Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of How Grief is Impacting Your Clients. This is the Katie episode. It's the Katies. Katie and Katie are coming to talk to you about hidden grief in your clients' lives. So I'm really excited to have you, Katie, because we connected on Instagram through both of our accounts being focused on grief. And today we have a topic that, as I was sharing before we hit record, is groundbreaking. And I love that you're doing research on it, and I can't wait to see what comes. So, Katie, will you share what you do, where you do it, and what type of clients come to see you?
Yeah, so I am located in Michigan and I do a couple of different things. So I work like my daytime job is at a nonprofit focused on vocational rehabilitation with people with disabilities. And I actually facilitate a cognitive behavioral interventions work skills program. It has a very long title. But program for people that have difficulty with obtaining and maintaining employment, just to help improve skills. And then I also am in private practice, and majority of the clients that I see are trans and non-binary, or just part of the LGBTQIA population. But then I also work with a lot of people with grief and bereavement and facilitate a grief support group once a week. So
Wow, woman. You
yes,
are doing it.
I work nonstop.
Yeah. But it sounds like the stuff that you're doing and knowing you, it's stuff that's passion for you.
Yeah, yes, it is. Absolutely. I have always had an interest in grief and bereavement since I was in high school. My best friend died, and it was just the response that the school kind of gave for all the students. I just remember very distinctly, like being in the library and being like, I want to be this someday. Like, I just love this safe space that's being created. And then I pursued that. And that 4 months after I got my master's degree, my wife died. And that just gave me a whole new, fresh perspective on grief. Was very supportive of her. She could have not, but
Yeah.
here we are anyways.
Yeah. I find it interesting how life kind of gives you these little pieces to the puzzle that you're like, no, I don't really need that piece to the puzzle. And
Yeah.
then like you get it and you're like, okay, I'm gonna put it in the puzzle. Like, and
Yeah,
here's what the bigger
exactly.
picture will look like. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And so you're seeing clients in person? Do you see anybody online as well? Or how does it work?
I see majority of my clients virtually. I do have a few that I see in person, but majority is virtual.
Online world.
That's my preference, because I am also last year was diagnosed with ADHD, and I realized this year in starting private practice that virtual really works best for me with
Mm.
ADHD, because I can fidget and do things and be comfortable in a way that my clients don't necessarily know. And it makes
Right.
me more attentive in session than when I'm in person. It's a little bit harder.
Yeah. Well, good segue into sharing about your ADHD diagnosis, because guys, that's what we're talking about today is hidden grief showing up in clients who have ADHD and how grief and ADHD can do this. So, what are some of the key issues you're noticing your clients are coming to you with? And let's specifically dive into those who have openly shared with you they have the diagnosis of ADHD.
Yeah, so a lot of the clients that I work with ADHD, like it's a lot of just realizing that the way that they experience their emotions is different. And sometimes the grief that they are expressing is not necessarily related to a loss. I just tend to see grief in everything. So like as they're talking about various things, I'm can connect the dots and see like, okay, here's this loss that's happening for you. And then there's also this ADHD factor that's happening and you're wondering why this is so different for you from maybe like your peers, and it's because of this. Like, it's because you have ADHD, and the way that ADHD presents for you is going to make these other experiences differently. So a lot of like variations in being kind of almost like hyperfixated on loss, or the opposite of that with object permanence, where they feel a detachment from whatever, either the loss of a person or the loss of an opportunity or the loss of experience. You know, a lot of my clients being trans and non-binary, like there's a lot of grief in family dynamics, and they are like, okay, they're like, it's fine, like it's okay, which is great, like there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes that's because of this like object permanence issue, where if people are not in front of you, we tend to forget that they exist. So it's almost like easier for them to navigate some of these, what would be otherwise very painful experiences of family rejection, because their family's not talking to them anymore. They just.
And I imagine if they're in a relationship, their partner might be quite confused of like, why are you so okay with this? Like, why is this? Why are you not upset or angry or whatever? But for them, there is no emotional attachment to it. So truly, it's not denial or I'm purposely avoiding. It's just truly no attachment.
Right. Yeah, it exactly. And then there's this additional layer of like guilt that sometimes comes along with it. Like, I should be more upset, because of that outside like perspective that people are bringing to them of like, are you sure you're okay? And they're like, yeah, I'm fine. But then it also happens in another whole way, because of ADHD, we also have a lot of this like rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So it can be hypersensitivity to every single little thing. So it's almost like there's one extreme or the other in some cases.
Right. There's not so much of a middle ground. How are you finding clients with ADHD and who are experiencing grief related to whatever? And we'll get into hidden grief in a moment. Coping skills and strategies. What are they using naturally? What do they go to? And then what is it you try to teach them to use?
Yeah, I think the coping skills part is often what's hard. They tend to have a hard time accessing coping skills, and a lot of my clients are also either like newly diagnosed or like suspect that they have a diagnosis, or it's like more of a like a self-reporting of like they have the symptoms of it. So it's not that they've been living with ADHD and are familiar with it for a long time either. So really learning and accessing those coping skills is challenging. So a lot of what we focus on is just like naming what's happening and starting with that. And a like reminder that this is what this is, you know, especially for like rejection sensitivity, like, okay, like this is not me, like I'm not being overly sensitive, like this is just a part of my ADHD and it's okay. And how can I combat that? I like to tell them to try giving their emotions sometimes like a little persona and like back talk to them. Like you could just tell yourself, no, we're not going to be sensitive about that today, because we don't need to be, and it's okay. I also tie in like a little bit of like an eclectic framework that I use. So I like to pull from lots of like various theories and things. So I'm a big fan of DBT and radical acceptance. So we'll do that too. Like if there's something that's happening, especially like family rejection stuff, like we're just going to radically accept this. Like this can just suck and this can just be, and we don't have to attach additional meaning to it other than it is what it is. And sometimes that's a big way to cope with both rejection sensitivity and the object permanence and the guilt that comes with the object permanence of like, we're not going to attach additional meaning to this. Like, this is just, it is what it is.
Right. I've loved always with DBT that analogy of like egg on Teflon. Like, it doesn't stick, it shoot completely off. Don't attach to it. Move forward. Ride the wave kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I noticed my clients who were diagnosed later on in life with ADHD are ones who lean towards addiction with alcohol or drugs, because it was like self-medicating in a way. It was like, I can't calm this down unless I do this or I use this. And in adulthood, it's not practical. You can't go to work and be like, oh, I can't focus. Let me go smoke something or drink something, or like, no.
Right.
So it starts to become compounded. And then I can imagine if you've experienced a loss and then also starting to realize, hey, I'm having these issues because of it, there's its own grief. And I know we've discussed before, hey, ADHD, finding out you have ADHD can create a sense of grief. But then also realizing there is something to be grieving of, a change, a loss of, whatever that might be. It compounds and it becomes a weight on that person's shoulders. On top of that, then you have how everybody judges they're responding. So I can imagine that this is a population that greatly needs support from people like you who are able to say, hey, whoa, you're normal. It's okay. Let's talk about how you grieve. Let's talk about what this looks like and stop comparing yourself, because it's not going to be the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I really love and appreciate so much of the grief community, and also have criticisms of it because there can be this this additional like judgment that comes from like within, where people are looking into the grief community and grief spaces for that support and that normalization. But because people with ADHD have different experiences, they don't relate to some of that, and they feel like a judgment not only from their outside people, but also from within the like different grief spaces and what is kind of talked about with grief, and some of the big emotions and big feelings that we kind of see. And that can compound it as well. Like, there's this expectation of, depending on who it is that died, you should be feeling maybe a certain way. And if you're feeling differently, then what's wrong with you?
Right.
Nothing is wrong with you. Like, it's perfectly fine.
Right. Well, and I think there's something lacking in the field of psychology and counseling and coaching in education around ADHD and grief, so that we have a client in front of us who has detached in that way, and we're going, oh, you're in denial, like, what is it you're avoiding? And the stuff I said earlier, like, we can then also project that onto our clients if we're not careful, if we're not educated on this.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times it is something that therapists read into, some like not intentionally, but we're always digging and wanting to see like what's hidden underneath and what's
Right.
What's really going on. And sometimes sometimes there truly is more that's going on, but sometimes it's maybe it's not. Like, maybe there might not be anything going on, and it isn't that they're in denial, it's just that they're processing information in a different way. And it might be just that they process information in a slower way, like just takes more time, or just differently. And you're absolutely right. Like, there is not a lot of education out there, and that can make it really difficult. One of the other things that I've noticed is that sometimes symptoms of ADHD kind of mirror symptoms that are often experienced in grief. And so if you have both going on, they become exacerbated. I was actually talking about this with somebody that attends my grief support group last night. And realizing like some of the like brain fog in particular that comes along with
Mhm.
grief. But then you also have brain fog and memory loss that happens with ADHD. So what happens if you're experiencing both? Is it that it's just you don't notice it as much in grief because
Right.
it's what you're already used to, or is it worse? And a lot of what people that I've talked to have said, like they're like, no, actually, now that you mention it, it's worse. It's worse. And it seems like it's worse with
Yeah.
people with ADHD than with people without. Like the brain fog is already terrible for everybody, but it's exacerbated.
And if you're, choosing to be on medication and then it's like, oh, this isn't working, but you're not factoring in grief causes the brain fog. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, this is going to take some time because I just need to heal. You might go to, your doctor or psychiatrist and be like, hey, it's not working, and shift on get on something new or change the dosage when it didn't really need to be changed.
Yeah.
So this is awareness even for those clients who have ADHD to start to learn as well. Like you said, this is how you think. This is how you process. Nothing is wrong with it. And it
Right.
truly is about education then on both sides, medical field, psychology field, and then also for clients themselves.
Yes. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
so we've already been like digging in. I didn't even get to go to the questions because we just dove in, which is, the Katie's, we're like in sync. We're there. So
Yeah, exactly.
so, hidden grief, for those of you who are not familiar, is grief that society doesn't really deem as something worth grieving. So, it can be due to a health diagnosis, a change in identity, and those aren't always negative things. A change in identity can become being a parent or getting married, and we have to grieve the loss of our old selves or the freedoms we used to have. It can be losing a job, losing a home, it can be moving, but it can also be things that are death related, infant
Mhm.
loss, miscarriage, things like this, losing a pet. And sometimes society doesn't understand why you're still grieving. So all of
Mhm.
this gets under that umbrella of hidden grief. And one of my missions is to start to teach people how hidden grief is very much a normal, natural part of our lives and how we can use it as a tool for our growth. And what we've been talking about today, Katie, is really how your clients have a lot of hidden grief. And if they're grieving a death, which they recognize, okay, there's been a death, but why don't I feel the way that all these other people around me are feeling? That's something to process. But when there's a lot of things for me to grieve, and I'm not happy because of this, or my relationship ended, or, friendships aren't working out because they don't get me, they don't understand me. There it is. There's that grief. And we as clinicians and coaches need to be better educated on how to work with our clients when they are trying to understand and navigate not only how they think, process, and are, but also what they've got going on in their world.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of just giving space and being I think patient sometimes with whatever it is that is happening, and allowing the clients to like sit with it and know that there's nothing wrong with it. And I'm so glad you talked about like friendships even ending, because I think that sometimes is something that gets discounted a lot. And like friendship breakups can hurt more than romantic breakups sometimes. And
Yeah.
there's so much like grief in that, and that loss of things. And people with ADHD have a hard time maintaining friendships, and that shows up a lot,
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
losses.
I see that with my friends. I see that in my clients. Relationships are important. And
Hmm.
yet one of the sticking points of why they come to therapy or get help, it's like, hey, I'm
Yeah.
really struggling in my friendship or romantic relationship or family relationships as well.
Hmm.
They often feel like the black sheep of the family if
Yes.
others around them aren't, whether it be ADHD or a similar diagnosis that makes it so it's like, oh, okay, we just need to be aware that we're not all the same. And it can
Hmm.
feel like, okay, I'm different. And it's
Yeah.
a bad thing instead of like, okay.
Yeah. I think that sometimes these differences are superpowers. Like that's what we should embrace and like use to our advantage.
I agree. Yes. We deem today that all things that we see as bad, actually, let's look at how we can start to use them as our strengths. I was working with a client yesterday, and I said, tell me your favorite like a Disney character growing up. And she shared one of the princesses, and I said, what do you like about her? And she listed all these qualities. And one of the things she was struggling with is identity, because everyone around her was like, you're not this enough, or oh, smile, you look like you're angry all the time, or always criticizing her without maybe meaning to.
Yeah.
And she named this princess and she listed all these things, and I was like, you do realize you described yourself, right? You're like, everything except for one quality. And it was this realization that often we look at everybody else and we go, look at what they have and look and we don't see our own strengths and our own capabilities with those superpowers.
Yeah.
That others around us might go, that's something's wrong with that. That's, that's not like everybody else. Actually, okay, yeah, that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah, we don't want to be like everybody else. That would be so boring.
A different world. This is true. So how are you finding fellow clinicians and coaches can start to educate themselves better on grief with clients who have ADHD?
Oh gosh, it's hard because there's not a lot out there to really even access. Like there's not a lot of information. It's not like you can be like, go read some books. I think just educating yourself more on the two different things and noticing where the similarities are, and just even having some initial awareness that if a person has ADHD or just neurodivergent of any kind, because that's, the umbrella, that if they're grieving, that it's going to look different. So, if you are a clinician or coach, or if anybody that works with grieving people, just educating yourself on what neurodivergency looks like and how that presents, and having an understanding that all the things that we know about grief are going to be different for that population.
Yeah, I think that's smart. Often we forget that we can do our own research with what we see around us and go, let me think of all the clients I've had who are similar like this. And let me think about this focus area, and then where does it overlay? And okay, because of that, just because you don't see a research paper out there yet doesn't mean, or there's no theoretical orientation that covers it, doesn't mean it's not a topic that needs to be focused on and aware of. And I think that's the beauty of you really looking into, okay, there needs to be research out there. There needs to be people talking about it.
Yeah, there will be a research paper out there on it someday. Just mark my word. Someday there will be. But yeah, I do. I think that that's kind of, we are critical thinkers. Like we have this ability, and so sometimes that's maybe what it is, that's how people can start to learn more and educate themselves, is to tap into that critical thinking skill and flex that muscle a little bit. And this might be a part of, and this is a part of something that is one of my strengths, is that I adapt things to other things all the time. This is why like I use DBT and everything, because I'm like, I can use this anywhere. And I just transform it. So having that ability, tapping into that for ADHD and applying what you know of ADHD to grief, but also just if you're working with grieving clients, and I don't think that therapists and clinicians and all this do this necessarily, but really like making sure that you're not putting them in a box of what grief is supposed to look like, or how healing from grief is going to look like, because it's going to be different for a person with ADHD or neurodivergency than somebody without.
Yeah. And you need to tailor their coping skills to them. Not this is what I heard what works, or it's worked for 10 out of 12 clients, so it's got to work for you. Like, oh, okay, maybe not.
Yeah, probably not.
Well, Katie, if people want to find you, where can they find you?
They can find me at Good Grief Bites everywhere. I'm on Instagram and TikTok. I have website that I am forever trying to make into something. I have a podcast that I'm also forever trying to make into something. I'm working on a project with my podcast that I want to start interviewing people with ADHD and like ADHD experts in the field, and talk about ADHD and grief a bit more. But yeah, good grief bites everywhere.
Excellent. And last question, what is the funniest thing you've ever experienced being a clinician?
I don't know. See, ADHD, we don't have good memory recall. So on the spot, trying to come up with something is actually a little bit difficult now that I'm thinking of it. You know what? It's not really funny, but it's funny. Is yesterday like came out of session and my client was like, somebody put googly eyes on all of the paintings. I was like,
okay, that's hilarious.
They sure did. They're like, I hope it doesn't ruin the paintings. I'm like, I sure hope it doesn't. And I just was kind of like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm like, okay, well, thank you for letting me know. Bye.
That is one of those moments where you're like, I'm the clinician here. Do I take care of this or do I not take care of this? Like, this is odd. Okay.
I decided that it's not my building. So I let somebody else know, and just laughed at it.
Good boundaries, Katie. Good boundaries. Not my job.
I don't know why they're here. I don't know what's happening. We're just gonna let this one be. Googly eyes on all the paintings. Okay.
On all the paintings. Genius. Yeah, what a strength. Well, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I realize I need to learn how to work with my clients better on hidden grief, I encourage you to go to my website, katieressler.com, and click on the word certification to learn about the Legacy Growth Certification Program and when we'll be running it next. I teach you how to work with hidden grief in your clients' lives, no matter what your focus area is as a clinician, coach, and healer. Thank you again, Katie, and I'll see you at the next episode, everyone.